Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, 1984. Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter in 1984 was genuinely intended as the last film in the series. The title wasn't a cunning tease in the manner of a Motley Crue or Ozzy Osbourne farewell tour. Tom Savini was enthusiastic about returning, after not being asked to do the second and third, partly because he thought it would be a neat way for him to both originate and then kill off the creature he'd helped to conceive. Director Joseph Zito had worked with Savini on his 1981 slasher movie The Prowler. This installment isn't a hasty knockoff as might be expected. It features a couple of notable cast members, a little more care given to overall characterization, and slightly more stylish kills, censors allowing, set in a palpable air of unease. However, for those who crave the inexplicable final scenes of before, rest assured that's still in place. Credit should be given to Barney Cohen's script for at least opening with an attempt to redress Part 3's dumb ending of missing Jason's body clearly in the doorway of the barn. His corpse is shipped off to the morgue, where he's put into a tray by horny jackass Dr. Axel. If his face is maddeningly familiar, it's Police Academy's amusingly accident-prone cadet Doug Fackler. Zito adds a nice touch of showing a breath stream emanating upward from the body as the tray is closed. Needless to say, it's not long before Jason is back on the rampage, in the imposing form of seasoned stuntman Ted White, and lumbers home to Crystal Lake to see who's now been sleeping in his camp. The interlopers Jason terrorizes there for the remainder consist of 6 teens and a young mother with a daughter and a son, Tommy, a diminutive 12-year-old version of genre favorite Corey Feldman, between his blockbuster turns in Gremlins and The Goonies. He's a resourceful squirt who's a dab hand with car mechanics and makes horror movie masks. He also becomes the focus by the climax in a fairly daring and yes, bamboozling plot twist, since young kids were rarely brought front and center in the genre unless possession was fully 9/10 of the idea. Feldman is a winning presence, precocious but not in the cloying sitcom way where you long for Jason to stuff him down a wood chipper. The other welcome camper is Crispin Glover as Jimmy, who brings his mesmerizing eccentricity the year before he shot to fame as Back to the Future's George McFly, in a role that would simply be the usual humdrum teen in the hands of a more prosaic actor. He's introduced as a hapless, dead-fuck lover, a harping nickname by his friend Ted, Lawrence Moneson, that becomes as grating to the audience as to him. He later claims one of 2 nubile twins, Camilla Moore as Tina, but not before treating us to some entertainingly explosive dancing that's as bizarre as the jerky, hypnotic moves of Joy Division's Ian Curtis. Glover's not so much dancing with her as at her. There's an extended take of more of it on the US DVD extras. Sadly, Glover gets a carving knife to the face in the kitchen, a queasily good gag filmed in reverse that was so graphic that only a split second was permitted by the MPAA. Again, a lengthy DVD bonus doc shows a number of takes for this acted the other way round in camera, amongst other kills. Another well-staged death is Tina's window plunge onto the roof of a car. For good measure, Zito's effects team had the windows blow out on impact, a memorably visceral moment. And so we come to the climactic confusion. Poor Tommy is so flummoxed at how to prevent Jason killing his sister that he opts to cut all his hair off and distract Jason with, ideally, a retro boy vision of himself, inspired by old newspaper cuttings. You could say it's an indirect nod to his character's maskwork talent, but the resulting bald, scarred pate makes him resemble a cross between a kiddie Charles Manson and a fledgling chick. But let's remember that Voorhees a jolly dim fellow, who could be transfixed by the opening of an envelope. This means that opportunistic Tommy gets to carve him up with a machete. Surely that now makes a definitive end to the series? Not necessarily, as the epilogue shows Tommy hugging his sister in hospital and looking at us over her shoulder with a quiet, sinister intensity. The spirit has passed on. Thus, alongside a $33 million box office superannuating the sequels into a new beginning, as we shall see. Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, 1985. When Paramount saw there were still dollars to be gained after the solid box office from the fourth in the Friday the 13th series, they couldn't resist putting a fifth one into production. After all, they were still making a great profit from relatively low costs, budgets of less than $3 million on each sequel earning over 10 times that amount. Frank Mancuso Jr. had by now understandably decided he'd rather not be forever known as the series producer. So, whilst still attached as executive producer overseeing them, he turned the main duties to Timothy Silver, a promotion for him from production manager. Continuation of quality was evidently a secondary consideration when assigning a director. The studio chose Danny Steinman, who most recently helmed the Linda Blair vigilante exploiter Savage Streets in 1984. He had also directed the 1973 hardcore porn feature High Rise, starring genre favourite Harry Reams. Now, whilst it's not totally fair to hold this background against a director, since many started out moonlighting in porn, or as they called it, the quaint term nudie flicks, the difference is that you expect their mainstream work to look like a graduation beyond dumb prurient sleaze. A New Beginning isn't. The original and earlier casts were on the whole fairly innocent, or at least healthy. Here, two of the couples are cokeheads, amid a pervasive general air of tawdriness. There's no attempt at making them anything more than fodder you'd like Jason to dispatch, which robs the movie of some much-needed threat level. To be fair to Steinman, on the US DVD documentary he recalls that the producers made him include a kill every 7 or 8 minutes. That's an underestimation. There are actually 20 in this film. A record? Possibly due to the censorious attention always paid by the MPAA, almost all the killings settle the camera on the brandished implement, then a sound effect to denote the actual impact off-screen. The premise of A New Beginning is that Tommy, the heroic tweener of the final chapter, has now grown into a post-traumatic, virtually monosyllabic late teenager, John Shepard. We are shown a nightmare in which his younger self, a rain-soaked Corey Feldman, who gamely agreed to a night's filming in between better projects, watches Jason being exhumed by a couple of thrill-seeking chuckleheads who are promptly offed. As Jason rounds on his young nemesis, the terrified older Tommy awakes. He is about to become the latest resident at the Pinehurst Halfway House, a residential treatment clinic for bad actors. Aside from a notably higher boob count than usual, what also betrays Steinman's pedigree as a hackmeister is how he directs many of the cast to play gratingly broad stereotypes reminiscent of X-rated fare. The redneck Hubbard mother and son, Ethel and Junior, Carol Locatell and Ron Sloan, are respectively a forced pantomime dame and a sub-basement Randy Quaid, devoid of any hoped-for intentional humour. To signpost that Dominic Brashear's portly Joey is a greedy teen, he enters his soul scene outside, clutching a chocolate bar melting over his fist and smeared across his face like a comic strip school glutton. Perhaps it is a kindness that he is suddenly hacked to death by fellow resident woodchopper Victor, Mark Venturini. What follows in the tackily dialogued script by Martin Kit Rosser, David Cohen, and Steinman is a dull, systematic culling of the residents by a lackluster Jason, after which our endurance is rewarded by finding out we've been had. All along, fans have been palmed off with a fake Jason. It was actually vengeful paramedic Roy Burns, Dick Viant, who turned hockey-masked homicidalist after discovering his son Joey was the axe-chocoholic. If it wasn't for you meddling kids. Hey, at least Scooby-Doo's unmasked villain bamboozled a bunch of teens you cared about. After Sheriff Exposition drops this steaming denouement bowel movement in the hospital on Melanie Kinnaman's facility director Pam, Tommy hallucinates a vision of Jason in his room. For him to then don the mask and finally threaten her signals that the mind meld of plot stupidity with the rest of the franchise is once again established. With a box office result of $10 million less than the final chapter, Paramount now seem to be losing their ailing franchise patient due to an overdose of poisonous decisions. However, an unlikely rejuvenating shot of humor and a fond embrace of the series' inherent absurdity would soon come to the rescue, in what came to be, surprisingly in my opinion, the best of the series. Stay tuned for Part 6. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.